And welcome back to the Big DR show here. That's 428 Chase on your YouTube dial. We got lots of this big sounds coming at you between now and midnight. Time, temperature checks, bulletins when they happen. We'll have it all. But first of all, the time in Phoenix, Arizona, it's 5 o'clock. In Chicago, it's 7 o'clock. And in New York, it's 8:14. And the weather out the Phoenix Sky Harbor is reporting it's 98 degrees, but who cares? I don't know anyone who lives at the airport. And tonight's forecast is dark, remaining dark most of the evening with widely scattered light by morning. And now for the headlines. 21 killed in 21 gun salute. Off-duty policeman shot by on-duty criminal. And a man with a power saw has been hit by a falling tree. Football team dies in sudden death overtime. Police fired over the heads of rioters. However, they killed 200 people living on the second floor. A Milwaukee man has been arrested for attempting to use food stamps to mail a watermelon. And out the lake at City Park, police arrested a one-armed man who is bothering the other boaters by continuously rowing in a circle. And in Philadelphia, police arrested a man attempting to make an unauthorized deposit in the sperm bank. And in other news, a man has barricaded himself inside of his home, but he is not armed and no one's paying any attention to him. A dog exploded on a busy downtown street corner. No one was killed, however, several people were overcome by fur. Police also estimate between 100 and 150 fleas lost their lives in the blast. And in medical news, a physician in Florida claims he's treating a 107-year-old woman who is pregnant. He also claims due to her advanced age, she will have a grown-up. The Food and Drug Administration has announced that saliva causes stomach cancer. However, only when swallowed in small amounts over a long period of time. And to kind of wind up the news tonight, the scientists have discovered a new disease that has no symptoms. There is no known cure, and it's impossible to detect, but there's no cases reported thus far. And now in sports, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers playing in. Buffalo Bills in Pittsburgh defeated the Bills 27-15, and kind of now I'd like to just put a disclaimer that the news articles mentioned here were false, except for the Steeler win. So like I said, I was putting a disclaimer on those news articles because I was just quoting George Carlin's news. And for the rest of the video, I'd like to go ahead and talk more about George Carlin, kind of dedicate the rest of this video to him. Rest in peace. George Carlin absolutely was one of my favorite comedians. I mean, I was introduced to comedy. I think real comedy was Cheech and Chong. And me and a friend of mine, we used to imitate some of the Cheech and Chong routines. And when he wasn't around, I still did both voices for Cheech and Chong. That was, I had a couple of their routines that was memorized, and used to just, do this routines in front of friends, and then later on co-workers. And then eventually, shortly after that, I was probably 12, maybe 13 years old when I first heard Richard Pryor. Now, Richard Pryor, again, I learned his routines. I had a couple of them memorized. And again, I would basically perform those or mimic or imitate Richard Pryor, for friends and sometimes co-workers. And I also did the same thing with Steve Martin. But George Carlin, he impressed me so much. I learned a lot of his routines, and then I used to do the same thing. I used to imitate George Carlin in front of friends and or co-workers. I even did 3 minutes of George Carlin at a live at a bar that had some live entertainment, rock band. And when they was on break, I got up and did 3 minutes of George Carlin. I'm a hack. I'm sorry. I don't have my own material. But I still would get some laughs out of people, when I did the George Carlin routines. But as I said, he is the GOAT, in my opinion. After 50 plus years, he had put out more material than probably any other comedian out there. I don't know that for a fact, 100%, but there's only a number of comedians that I probably heard that I really like a lot. In addition to George Carlin, I think Brian Regan is hilarious, and I think Richard Jeni, who is also no longer with us. Richard Jeni, he was a pretty funny guy too. I liked him a lot. But in my opinion, George Carlin, he just has so much material. He actually started out with a partner. His name was Jack Burns, and they released an album together. It was called Burns and Carlin at the Playboy Club Tonight. Now, they only cut the one album, and then they went their separate ways. That album was released in 1963, going way back. And then in 1967, George Carlin released his first solo album. It was called Takeoffs and Turn-Ons. That was released in 1967. Probably wasn't well known at the time, but there was one of the routines from that album, I think, got some recognition later on. It was called Wonderful Wino, a top 40 disc jockey. And then in 1972, he released another album called FM and AM, and that was released in 1972. And pretty funny stuff there. There was a little bit of that routine a little bit of that LP. There was one routine, I think, that I, again, was a couple that I memorized and would mimic. Later on in 1972, he released another album called Class Clown. Now, Class Clown was the one that I think put him on the map, because he did the 7 words you can never say on television. And that he got arrested for, and it became a big Supreme Court about, language that, that it was a big case. I won't go into all the details at this time, but a lot of people who are familiar, they already know about it. So where are we at so far? So in 1967, his first solo. 5 years later, did the FM and AM. 1972. And then also in 72, he did The Class Clown. And then in 1973 was his next release, and it was titled Occupation Full. And then in 1974, he released Toledo Window Box. And in 1975, it was a kind of a long title, and he was really the only person, but for whatever reason, he threw in an extra name as An Evening with Wally Londo featuring Bill Slazzo. Again, this is all George Carlin. And then in 1977, he released On the Road, which this is the album cover, we're looking at right now. On the Road, 1977. And then in 1981, he released one called Killer Carlin. Now, Killer Carlin basically is just a retitle from that first album he did with Jack Burns. That album, I think it was re-released, I think, 3 times with different titles each release. And the last one was the one Killer Carlin from 1981, which is basically the same thing as the 63 recording, Burns and Carlin at the Playboy Club. Next, in 1981, his release was A Place for My Stuff. Very funny routine. There's several of them that I really liked a lot. Well, actually, going back to 1975 release, An Evening with Wally Londo featuring Bill Slazzo. Now this one, even though I had heard the 7 dirty words you can never say on TV, going all the way back to his third album, Class Clown. My first purchase of a George Carlin album was this one, An Evening with Wally Londo featuring Bill Slazzo. That was in 1975. At the time, I was working at a record store, and the owner was Layback Records in Massillon, Ohio, and the owner of the store was Vince Deck, and he was a Vietnam veteran. And he was the one who basically turned me on to George Carlin. He just played one little piece from that album, and boom, I was hooked. So I bought the George Carlin album, and there was a couple routines on that album that I memorized, and again, performed in front of friends. And On the Road, that one was another one, I guess a 1977 release. I did a couple of the routines from this album. Now, jumping ahead to that, back to A Place for My Stuff, a couple of my favorites there that I would perform was called Icebox Man and Fussy Eater. There was another one called, let's see, Rice Krispies. Yeah, the Rice Krispies one, I used to love that one. And then in 1984, it was Carlin on Campus. And then in 1986 was Playing With Your Head. Pretty funny album. and then in 1988. So there was that little gap from 1986 to 88. And between those two album releases, he changed his whole approach to comedy. This is when he first started being a little more critical and political. Everything before that, I don't think politics came up at all, or maybe not much. I think there were a couple pieces there where there was like some politics, but not. But it wasn't. It was more of an observational thing that he did there, and but not so much as he does here. And on religion as well. I mean, in his earlier albums, there were some different viewpoints about religion, and it was more observational and funny. But like I said, in his later years, like I said, beginning here in 1988, his whole approach has changed. He became more critical and a little more aggressive and critical towards politics and religion and people in general. I mean, he really started getting pretty aggressive and critical. And then in 1990, as he had a parent advisory, this one here again was pretty good album, but the one that had the most recognition, at least from my observations on YouTube. There's a lot of people that do these reactions to George Carlin, and one of the more popular ones that I've seen these reactors do is called euphemisms. George Carlin was, very, 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 language conscientious, so to speak. Words and language was a pet peeve of his, and an area that he really put emphasis on language and its uses, and he does a lot of that here with the euphemisms, which he calls soft language. So after that, he did Jammin' in New York, and that was in 1972. This was one of his more popular videos from this album was The Planet is Fine. It's all about saving the planet. Okay, so that was 1992. Excuse me. And then in 1996, he released Back in Town. This one here got a lot of YouTube action from the reactors, mainly on abortion, sanctity of life, and capital punishment, familiar expressions, free-floating hostility, even the state prison farms. That whole album got a lot of reactors doing a lot of the, at one point or another, pretty much everything on this album. And then also, in 1999, he released You Are All Diseased. This one got a lot of recognition on his fear of germs routine and airport security. I've seen a lot of people react to those two routines by George Carlin. And then in 2001, he released Complaints and Grievances. Again, like I said, that was part of his big change in his approach to comedy. Because up until that album released in 1986, Playing With Your Head. Everything up to that point, all the LPs released up to that point were pretty much good, funny, observational comedy, talking about all the kinds of different things that we all experience. As I mentioned, Icebox Man, for instance, and Rice Krispies, and everything he did really is, at some point in your life, you probably experienced a lot of the things that he talks about. And it's all good, funny stuff. But like I said, that first release in 1988, that one, like I said, it's What Am I Doing in New Jersey. That, like I said, that was from 86 to 88 is where he made his big change. He really got more critical, more complaining, and some people even in their reactions consider, he's as more philosophical than funny in a lot of areas, and like I said, more critical. But like I said, then in 2001 was Complaints and Grievances. That's exactly what he did a lot of. He, talks about traffic accidents, people who ought to be killed, and like I said, that one in that specific one right there. You've seen a lot of people on YouTube who would react to that video. And then in the year of his death in 2008, that was the last LP that he released, and it was called It's Bad For You. And then there was a couple compilation albums. He did a couple of audio books, which they all pretty much covered material that he did on his albums. He had Brain Droppings was his first audio. Well, it was a hardback book initially, but it also became an audio book. And he, again, in that book, it has a lot of the routines that he did live on an album, either live or a studio album, what have you. But there's also a lot of stuff that was never released on an album or that he performed live. But in his audio book, he reads it to you. He reads the book to you, and but even in the audio book, I have the hardback copy, and there's some stuff in the audio book that is not. There's a lot of stuff in the audio book where it omitted a lot of the stuff that he did in the book. His second book was Napalm and Silly Putty. Same thing. Has a lot of his routines that has been on his previous albums. But it also has a lot of other material that was never released. And then he had another book after that, was called When Will Jesus Bring the Pork Chops? Now, I had the hardback copy of the Brain Droppings, and I had the paperback copy of Napalm and Silly Putty, but I only had the MP4 version of When Will Jesus Bring the Pork Chops? But all three of those were books, actual books, hardback, paperback, what have you, but they were also released on audio books. And then in 2016, in 2000, that was 2016, 8, I skipped over one that he released in 2006. His Life is Worth Losing. That one also very funny, but and The Modern Man was, it was like George Carlin rapping, but he wasn't, no, without any music in the background, but it was like a rap. He was rhyming and he was laying it down like a rap. But but there was A Dumb Americans was another one that was pretty popular from that LP. But as I was starting to say, he also after death, there was another album that was released in 2016 titled "I Kind of Like It When a Lot of People Die." I haven't seen a video on that, and even though I suggested it to a number of different people, other reactors to do, there was one or two people that did go ahead and reacted to it on their YouTube channel. But I've been told by many of the reactors, because I've submitted, the YouTube channels, they all want you to, if they do like a George Carlin video, they always say, send in suggestions if you want to hear more George Carlin. And of course, me being a Carlin freak, man, I send them lists. I send them about 100 or so suggestions on, and like I said, a lot of the ones that I suggested, they're all audio only. There's no video of the routine. And then there's some that are audio only, and there is a routine of it, but there's, I always catch there's a difference between the video of a particular routine and the audio version. And some, obviously, George Carlin, when it comes to George Carlin, his facial expressions and body gestures and what have you, is like 90% of the joke, and then the other 10% is coming from the material itself. So, like I said, a lot of people that have the YouTube videos, they won't react to an audio only because, they want to see the video. And I understand that, but by the same token, if you're ignoring the ones that are only available on audio, then you're missing a lot of other material that's very funny stuff that you just haven't heard, other people haven't heard. Somewhere down the line, I plan on doing some George Carlin reactions, and the only problem is with other YouTube channels, they are hearing it for the first time. But myself, I mean, a lot, like I said, I've heard and seen just about everything George Carlin has ever done. Because I started buying albums, like I said, back in 1975, I think, was when I got my first album, the George Carlin album. And then after that, I went back and bought the previous albums up to that point, and then I continued buying them throughout the year. So I had just about everything that he ever produced on either vinyl, CDs, or MP4. Even interviews. So I consumed everything. So if I was trying to react to George Carlin, I'm not. It wouldn't be the first time I heard it, so you wouldn't actually see what my initial reaction was, as if I heard it for the first time. But at any rate, like I said, that might be something I might put on the channel at some point down the road. And also, I plan on doing more music reactions. My next reaction with music, I decided I want to work on a theme, and uh, my first series I think I'm going to do, or the first theme that I'm going to do is I'm going to call it Creature Feature, because there's a lot of songs that involve different types of creatures. Rather than be, if it might be it might be the title of a song, it might be part of the lyrics of the song, or it might actually be the name of the band. But if there's any type of animal, be it birds, fish, frogs, lions, whatever, horses, I'm probably gonna work on that type of a theme, where all the videos that I do are gonna be related in the insect animal world, so to speak. And I think to kick that series off, or that theme off, is look for it. It's gonna be my first one. It's called Animal Magnetism. Again, that's going to be for my creature feature theme of music to play and react to or talk about in my next video. Please, once again, don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time around. Thanks, and have a good one. Bye now.